Good morning. Out in my hothouse. A hothouse is a fantastic way to propagate cuttings, especially rose cuttings. And you don't need a hothouse to propagate rose cuttings. In fact, I've done all of my rose cuttings out in the open. So long as you have the right method for growing them, you can pretty much grow roses. Roses are very compromising. They're a very hardy plant. Their branches are canes, so they really don't require a lot of time and attention once you give them the correct growing environment. But I'm going to show you in a minute, I've got my roses in the hothouse because we're about to head into winter here in the Southern Hemisphere, and I'm taking advantage of this hotter, humid setting. I have all sorts growing in here. I've got melons, tomatoes, and perhaps in another video I'll go into that. But for now, let's talk about roses. So this year I've only got a couple of rose cuttings happening, but if you are planning on propagating roses from cuttings, saving money, and actually the benefit of growing them from cuttings is that once they take and they root, you have true root roses. That means you don't have a mother stock rose that is used as a grafting method that will pretty much give life to your cutting. Because in the commercial industry, we all know that roses are grafted onto a mother stock, like a mother root stock. That's the commercial industry these days. But for those of us that love roses and love genuine true root roses, growing them from cuttings is your way to do it. So my first tip for growing roses in cuttings is the medium. And this medium is nothing but sawdust. Beautiful sawdust. The good thing about sawdust is that it not only holds moisture, it also has a lot of airflow. So it's porous enough to allow for the airflow, but it maintains moisture, which is critical for your cuttings. And I have a whole lot in here. Some are experimental, but I've got olive, I've got roses, I've got fruit trees, I've got all sorts. And I have found with all my years of growing that sawdust is 100% the best growing medium for propagating cuttings. You've probably experienced in your past growing cuttings in soil, but I have found with my experience growing cuttings in soil, it's a real hit and miss, because you want the soil to be wet enough or moist enough to be able to keep your cuttings from drying out. But then you also have to try and navigate making sure that your cuttings will not rot, because too much moisture will absolutely make them rot. So this is all that I'm doing this year, because in a minute I'm going to show you my rose garden, and I'm going to show you some roses that have been grown from cuttings. And if you're like me, and you love roses, but you know, in the world now, and look, I don't mind spending money on roses, but $25 a rose in this country, minimum. And I figured I don't want to spend that anymore when I know how to grow them from cuttings. So let's go and have a look at roses that have been grown from cuttings. So here's our cutting. Just going to trim off. I don't leave anything on the cane. Everything is taken off. There you have it. I could get 2 roses out of this cane. I'm going to snip it in half. You don't want to get a really thin cane, but from my own experiments, they will still produce a rose. So I shave down the size like this to expose the inner part of the cane. And then I get the rooting powder. Just a regular rooting powder. Just dip them in. That is all I do. So long as those ends are covered, I then stick them. Into the sawdust, like so, trying to find a spot. And there you have it. And this is where you just wait. You wait for months. Depending on your climate and the time of the year, will depend on how quick these rose cuttings will develop a callus on the end and will root. These cuttings have only been in for about a month. They're not going to have much of a callus on them, but usually after 3 to 4 weeks, you will start to see a callus on the base of the rose. It's going to take a further 3 months or so to get a really good root system. So I would suggest to leave your rose in this sawdust medium for as long as possible. When you start seeing new leaf growth, and a lot of it, that is the time to sort through your cuttings, take them out and see what you have. And then once you see the roots of your rose cutting, plant them in the ground. And then you will have your own beautiful true root rose. We had a really hot summer in the southern hemisphere. I live in Australia, and we had a real brutal, hot, dry summer. Absolutely no rain, which doesn't bother roses so much so long as they get watered, because roses usually like the hot weather, but this is the only time of year that I have found so far that my roses are actually coming out and blooming, because in a week or 2 weeks of consecutive 40-degree heat, these rose buds that come out don't even last a day. They just wither and just dry up. And that's it. They all burn and that's it. So this is really, so in the fall here in my part of the world, you see how dry it is when my roses have absolutely thrived. We have mild winters here. Our winters range from Celsius, probably anywhere between 15 degrees Celsius to 25 degrees Celsius. So quite mild. And this year and last year, very dry. So anyway, this is the best these roses have ever looked, particularly my roses grown from cuttings. So this is a rose that has been grown from a cutting. She's a couple of years old, and I don't actually think I have had a bloom on her yet. And this one has been a rose grown from a cutting. Look at that. One thing you got to remember when you're growing roses from cuttings, see? You can see down there, that's a true root rose. One thing you've got to allow when you grow roses from cuttings is time. It takes time for a rose bush, once it's developed from cutting, to develop. Let me give you an idea. These little roses here, you can see they almost died in the summer. It was just so hot. These are grown from cuttings. This is from last year. I actually grew these from cuttings last year, and that's how big this is right now. Granted, I haven't given it as much attention as I probably should have. Like I said, roses are very forgiving. They will still usually survive. And here's another she's only just grown back her leaves after a really dry, hot summer, just down here. So that's going to grow over the winter. Just get that weed out. That's going to grow over the winter. You can see it's just come back beautifully. And here's another one that I've grown. So these were put in the ground in the last weeks of summer, a prolonged summer. So I put them in the ground when I thought summer was ending, and it wasn't ending. So they're only little, but now they're gonna go really well. It's just wonderful to be able to have a rose that is a true root rose, because all these ones that I have here have all been grafted. You can see the brown of this beautiful big rose, which is, this is a Wisely. You can see how it almost died in the summer, and now it's just came back. But these are all on grafted stock. So you can see that big bulbous part down here. That's grafted stock. All of these are grafted stock because that's the commercial rose industry. Gone are those days, back in the olden days, where roses were true root roses and were not mass produced like they are now. Also in the mix, I have some roses that have been grown from seed, but perhaps I'll talk about that in another video. But this is my rose. It's a good feeling to be able to grow a rose from seed. And although it's a single petal variety, it's a real bushy, beautiful rose, and it's always produced little flowers. But it takes a while for roses to grow. So in their beginning stages, they are going to be little rose bushes. And this is another one grown from seed. Not this one, but this one here. This one, I can get that branch out the way. This one has actually never produced a flower. I don't actually know, what kind of rose this is, but it seems to be a bit of a climber. That is a rose grown from seed. Never had a bloom on her yet. And I've got a couple of others in here that are grown from seed, but I'll share that in another video. So to give you an example, I'm going to cut here, and we're going to take this. So here's our cutting. Just going to trim off. I don't leave anything on the cane. Everything is taken off. There you have it. I could get 2 roses out of this cane. I'm going to snip it in half. You don't want to get a really thin cane, but from my own experiments, they will still produce a rose. So I shave down the size like this to expose the inner part of the cane. And then I get the rooting powder. Just a regular rooting powder. Just dip them in. That is all I do. So long as those ends are covered, I then stick them into the sawdust, like so. Trying to find a spot. And there you have it. And this is where you just wait. you wait for months. Depending on your climate and the time of the year will depend on how quick these rose cuttings will develop a callus on the end and will root. These cuttings have only been in for about a month. They're not going to have much of a callus on them, but usually after 3 to 4 weeks you will start to see a callus on the base of the rose. It's going to take a further 3 months or so to get a really good root system. So I would suggest to leave your rose in this sawdust medium for as long as possible. When you start seeing new leaf growth, and a lot of it, that is the time to sort through your cuttings, take them out and see what you have. And then once you see the roots of your rose cutting, plant them in the ground. And then you will have your own beautiful true root rose.